Ever wondered why some gardeners grow seedlings that look like sturdy little trees, while others end up with weak, spindly stalks, even though the seeds came from the same exact packet? The secret usually isn't some miracle fertilizer, it's what they're planted in. Today, we're breaking down the most underrated topic in gardening, choosing the right seedling containers. Most importantly, we'll look at how to pick the perfect volume to build a strong foundation for your future harvest. Stick around until the end to find out why a small 7-ounce cup can actually be better than a large pint-sized one, and how one simple mistake in choosing your pots can cost you half your tomato crop. By the way, let me know in the comments right now, what do you usually use for your seedlings? I'm really curious to see what works for you. Before we get into the specifics, let's talk about why this is so critical. Think of a seedling like a small child. They need their own room, but if you put a toddler in a massive mansion, they'll feel lost, overwhelmed, and might even get sick. It's the same with plants. The roots are essentially the brain and the stomach of the plant at the same time. If there's too much soil, a tiny, fragile root system just can't process all that moisture and nutrition. The soil then becomes waterlogged, starts to compact, and begins breeding harmful fungi. The roots literally stop breathing and start to rot. On the flip side, if the pot is too small, the plant lives in a state of constant stress. The soil dries out in a matter of hours, the nutrients run dry, and growth just grinds to a halt. Our job is to find that perfect balance, the ideal nursery, where our green pets can grow up strong and healthy. Let's start with the single biggest misconception. Many beginner gardeners think, I'll just plant the seed in a large pot right away to avoid the hassle of transplanting later and save the roots from stress. It sounds logical, but in reality, it's one of the most fatal mistakes you can make. Think about it. A tiny seedling produces a root that is barely an inch long. When it's sitting in a massive container, it's surrounded by a huge, saturated block of soil. The plant physically cannot absorb all that water. As a result, the soil never dries out, air stops circulating, and the roots literally begin to suffocate and rot. As the plant turns yellow and starts to wither, gardeners often make things worse by adding even more water. Thinking the plant is thirsty, this only speeds up the damage. Remember the golden rule. The size of the container must match the root system's current size, not the size it will be 2 months from now. Gradually increasing their living space in stages is the true secret to success. Let's take a look beneath the surface to see what's actually happening with your plant's roots in different size containers. Ideally, the root system should grow evenly, filling the entire soil block. When the roots reach the walls and bottom of the pot, it sends a signal to the plant. It's time to branch out and create a dense, fibrous network. This is the key. Because a root system like this is far more efficient at absorbing water and nutrients. But if the container is too large, the main root might just dive straight to the bottom without branching. It hits the floor, leaving the top and middle of the soil completely unused. You end up with a weak plant and a single, ineffective root that will struggle to adapt after transplanting. The right pot size encourages the plant to grow a thick beard of roots, the true foundation of its health and your future harvest. Visualize it, not just a single long string, but a lush, branching cloud of roots. Another factor to consider with larger containers is the risk of overcooling. In the spring, when we're growing seedlings on windowsills, temperatures can be quite unpredictable. At night, a chill often seeps in from the glass, while a small amount of soil warms up quickly from the room's heat and sunlight. A large 1-litre pot, especially when the soil is damp, stays cold much longer. Cold, soggy soil creates the perfect environment for root rot, specifically the dreaded damping off. When it's too cold, the roots simply can't function. They stop absorbing nutrients, growth stalls, and the plants often take on a sickly bluish or purplish tint. This is why, especially for heat-loving crops like peppers and eggplants, it's best to start with a minimal volume. You want to avoid creating a cold swamp around those delicate young roots. Remember, keeping the roots warm is just as vital as keeping the leaves warm. Now let's talk about water balance, which is directly tied to the size of your container. It might seem like a larger pot keeps the soil moist longer, meaning you can water less often. That's true, but it's also a bit of a trap. While there is more moisture overall, the plant only uses a tiny fraction of it. The rest just sits there and stagnates. In a smaller cup, the soil dries out faster and more evenly. This allows you to water your seedlings more frequently, but in smaller amounts. This cycle is actually much better for the plant. Every time the soil dries, it makes room for fresh water and, more importantly, vital oxygen to reach the roots. It also gives you much better control. When you're using a small container, if the top layer looks dry, it's usually safe to water. But in a large pot, the surface can be bone dry like a desert, while the bottom is a literal swamp. Managing moisture in a small volume is simply easier, which significantly lowers the risk of both overwatering and accidental dehydration. Now that we've covered the basics, let's get into the specifics. The most popular, affordable and versatile choice is the humble plastic cup. Their biggest selling points are the low price and the fact that you can use them over and over again. They come in various sizes, anywhere from 100 to 500 millilitres, so you can find the perfect fit for any plant at any stage of its growth. Plastic doesn't get soggy, it keeps its shape, and it's a breeze to wash and disinfect for the next season. One important tip: go for opaque cups rather than clear ones. If light hits the soil through a transparent cup, green algae can start growing, which will compete with your plant for nutrients and oxygen. Plus, roots naturally thrive in the dark, and exposure to light can actually stress them out. And here's the golden rule: always remember to make drainage holes in the bottom. Without them, even a light watering can turn the cup into a death trap for your roots. Now let's debunk a common gardening myth about peat pots and pellets. Marketers sell them as a revolutionary solution, eco-friendly, convenient and stress-free for roots, since you plant the whole thing. No, in reality, they often do more harm than good. First, high-quality peat pots aren't cheap. Second, the walls dry out incredibly fast, literally wicking moisture away from the soil. This means you'll have to water your seedlings constantly, and missing even one day can be fatal. But the biggest problem occurs after transplanting. These eco-friendly walls are often far too tough. Roots can't break through them, so the plant stays trapped in that tiny space, like a prison, even once it's in the ground. The result is a weak, stunted plant that struggles to survive. If you still choose to use them, make sure to tear or at least thoroughly score the walls and the bottom before planting. Give those roots a fighting chance to break free and grow. Another popular choice among gardeners is the seedling tray, often loved for its compact design. These are essentially blocks made up of many small cells. They are a real lifesaver when it comes to saving space on a windowsill, especially if you're growing a large number of plants. However, there is a catch. The volume of each cell is usually quite small, anywhere from 30 to 70 millilitres. This is only enough for the very early stages of growth, essentially until the first set of true leaves appears. If you leave the seedlings in these trays for too long, the roots will quickly fill the space and become root-bound, causing the plant to struggle and run out of nutrients. Think of these trays as a great nursery, but not a permanent home. They are ideal for crops like cabbage, asters, or onions, which don't need much room initially. But for tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants, a tray is only a temporary stop. You will need to transplant them into larger, individual pots as soon as they are ready. For the resourceful and budget-conscious gardener, there's a whole world of DIY containers just waiting to be discovered. The possibilities are truly endless. Think yogurt or sour cream cups, cut-up plastic bottles, milk cartons, or even handmade paper pots. The best part? It's completely free and eco-friendly because you're giving a second life to materials that would otherwise go to waste. The rules here are the same as they are for store-bought pots. First, every container must be thoroughly cleaned. Second, the size needs to be a good fit for the plant. And most importantly, and I cannot stress this enough, you must add drainage holes. Dairy containers are almost perfect for this. They're made from food-grade plastic, they're opaque, and they usually come in the perfect size, anywhere from 8 to 16 ounces. For plants like cucumbers or zucchini that need more room to grow, cut up 1 or 2-litre bottles work wonders. So, before you rush out to the store, take a look around your kitchen. Your perfect seedling containers might already be right there at home. Now let's talk about specific plants. We'll start with the slow starters, things like peppers, eggplants, and various flowers, such as petunias or lobelias. These seeds take a while to germinate, and the seedlings grow quite slowly at first. They also have very small, delicate root systems. For these varieties, a small starting container is ideal, somewhere between 100 and 150 millilitres. You can use small cell trays or tiny plastic cups. In a small space like this, the roots can quickly fill out the soil, which makes it much easier to manage watering without the risk of drowning those tender sprouts. As they grow, keep an eye on the roots. Once they've fully occupied the soil, which is easy to see in clear cups or by gently lifting the plant out, it's time to move them up. Transfer the plant into a larger container, roughly 250 to 300 millilitres. For peppers and eggplants, this is usually the final size they'll need before going out into the garden. This step-by-step approach keeps the root system active and prevents your seedlings from stalling. Next up, let's talk about the king of the garden, the tomato. Tomatoes grow much faster than peppers and have a robust, aggressive root system. They actually love being repotted and can easily sprout extra roots along the stem if you plant them a bit deeper. For tomatoes, a two-step approach works best. Start with a small cup, about 200 millilitres. The plant will thrive there until it develops 3 or 4 true leaves. Once the roots have filled that space, it's time to move them into a larger container. The ideal final size for a tomato seedling is 500 millilitres, basically a standard half-litre cup. Some gardeners even prefer 1-litre containers, especially for taller varieties. A larger pot allows the tomato to build a massive root system, which will provide everything it needs once it's finally moved to the greenhouse or the garden bed. Don't be afraid to give your tomatoes plenty of space. They'll reward you with a truly generous harvest. Then there are the true giants, plants that quickly outgrow any standard container. I'm talking about the squash family. Cucumbers, zucchinis, pumpkins, and melons. These plants have incredibly delicate root systems that hate being disturbed. That's why it is best to skip the transplanting stage and plant your seeds directly into their own large pots. For a single cucumber or zucchini plant, you'll need at least 500 to 700 millilitres of soil, though a full litre is even better. In a smaller space, those powerful roots will quickly hit the walls, causing the plant so much stress it may struggle to recover once it is moved to the garden. It is also crucial not to let these seedlings get too old. The ideal window for transplanting is between 25 and 30 days. So, if you're starting your seeds indoors, give them plenty of room right from the start. Make sure they have a spacious home so nothing holds back their growth. Now, what about flowers? When it comes to containers, it really depends on the specific variety you're growing. For delicate, slow-growing flowers like lobelia, alyssum, or portulaca, small cell trays are perfect for the early stages. In fact, you don't even need to thin them out individually. They're often transplanted directly into the garden in small clumps. For larger annuals such as asters, zinnias, or marigolds, you can follow the same routine as you would with tomatoes. Start them in small cups, about 100 to 200 millilitres, and then pot them up into larger containers, around 300 to 500 millilitres, as they grow. Perennials that develop slowly in their first year can stay in smaller containers, up to half a litre, for the entire season. This gives them plenty of time to build a strong, healthy root system by autumn, ensuring they're hardy enough to survive the winter. The most important thing is to keep a close eye on your plants. If growth seems to stall and the roots have completely filled the pot, that's your sign it's time to move them into a larger home. You've likely heard the terms pricking out and potting up. But what exactly is the difference, and why does it matter? Pricking out is the process of transplanting a seedling while pinching off the tip of its main taproot. This encourages the plant to develop a denser, more fibrous root system. It works great for tomatoes, cabbage and asters, and is best done once the first two true leaves appear. On the other hand, peppers, eggplants, and all members of the squash family are much more sensitive. Their roots take a long time to recover from any damage, so for them, we use potting up. Potting up means carefully moving a plant into a larger container without disturbing the root ball. You simply slide the plant out of its small pot, place it into a bigger one, and fill the gaps with fresh soil. It's completely stress-free for the plant. Essentially, you're just giving it more room to grow. Mastering the art of potting up is a key step in raising healthy, vigorous seedlings. Let's take a closer look at the up potting method, as it's truly the foundation of plant care. How do you know when it's time? The most reliable sign is the roots. If you see white roots peeking through the drainage holes or circling the entire soil ball, it's time to act. To start, pick a new pot that's about an inch larger in diameter than the current one. Add a little fresh soil to the bottom. Then gently slide the plant out of its container, keeping the root ball intact. It helps if the soil is slightly damp, not so dry that it crumbles, but not so wet that it turns into a muddy mess. Place the plant in the centre of its new home and fill the gaps around the sides with fresh, nutrient-rich potting mix, pressing it down lightly. Finish with a quick watering. This simple process takes only a couple of minutes, but it gives your plant a massive growth boost by providing more space and fresh nutrients. Then there's the so-called lazy method, where you skip transplanting altogether. We've already discussed why it's risky to put a tiny seed into a massive pot, but are there times when this approach is actually justified? Yes, but with a few important caveats. First, it works for crops that hate being moved, such as squash or pumpkins. In these cases, we use a large container right from the start, but you have to be incredibly precise with your watering. Second, this is a technique for seasoned gardeners who have mastered the art of managing soil moisture. Instead of watering directly at the base of the plant, they water around the edges of the pot. This encourages the roots to stretch out in search of moisture, gradually filling the entire space. For a beginner, however, this is a huge gamble. It's far too easy to overwater and end up with root rot. So, unless you have years of experience under your belt, don't take the shortcut. Gradually potting up from a small container to a larger one is still the most reliable, foolproof way to grow strong, stocky seedlings with a perfect root system. Let's look at some common transplanting mistakes that can ruin all your hard work. Mistake number 1 is bad timing. Repotting too early, before the roots have fully filled the soil, is pointless. It often leads to the same issues as using a pot that's way too big. But waiting too long is even worse. When roots become a tangled, solid mass at the bottom of the container, the plant goes into deep stress. Its growth stalls, and it will take a long time to wake up in its new home. Mistake number 2 is disturbing the root ball. Many crops are very sensitive to this, so always try to keep the soil around the roots intact. Mistake number 3 is getting the planting depth wrong. Tomatoes actually love being buried deep because they grow extra roots along the stem. But peppers and eggplants are different. You should never bury them deeper than they were originally growing, or the stems might rot. Keep them at the same soil level as before. By avoiding these simple mistakes, you'll make every transplant as smooth and successful as possible. We've mentioned this before, but it's so important that it bears repeating. Drainage holes are not a suggestion, they are an absolute must. No matter what container you're using, whether it's a store-bought nursery pot or a repurposed sour cream container, you need holes at the bottom for excess water to escape. Without them, water will pool at the bottom, and root rot is practically guaranteed. So, how many holes do you actually need? For a standard 8 to 16 ounce cup, 3 to 5 holes about half a centimetre wide are plenty. You can easily make these using a hot nail, an awl, or even a small drill. Some gardeners worry that soil will leak out through the holes. If you're concerned about that, just place a small piece of paper towel or a thin layer of coarse sand at the bottom before adding your soil. That said, if your potting mix has the right structure, it usually stays in place on its own. Don't skip this simple step. Your plant's roots need to breathe, and proper drainage is the only way to keep them healthy. Clear or opaque pots. It's a debate that never seems to end among gardeners, and both sides have their loyal fans. The biggest advantage of clear pots is visibility. You can see exactly what's happening with the soil, whether it's getting too dry or if it's overwatered. But more importantly, you can track root development. This takes the guesswork out of knowing exactly when it's time to transplant. Of course, there are downsides. Light can trigger algae growth, and naturally roots prefer to grow in the dark. Opaque pots solve these issues by creating a more natural environment, but the catch is that you lose that window into the soil, making it much harder to monitor moisture levels and root health. So, which one should you choose? The perfect compromise is to use clear cups but place them inside an opaque tray or box that blocks direct light. This gives you the best of both worlds. The roots stay in the dark, but you can still check on their progress whenever you need to. If you're like me and prefer using reusable plastic cups for your plants, then cleaning and disinfecting them is a vital part of getting ready for the new season. Over the last year, more than just dirt can build up on those surfaces. Fungal spores and pest eggs could be hiding there too. Using dirty containers puts your new, healthy seedlings at risk, so don't skip this step. First, give the cups a thorough scrub with a brush and some basic soap to remove any leftover soil. Next, you'll need to disinfect them. There are several ways to do this. One simple method is to soak them for an hour or two in a strong potassium permanganate solution. You can also use a diluted bleach solution, 1 part bleach to 9 parts water, or a specialised horticultural disinfectant. Once they're disinfected, rinse them thoroughly with clean water and let them dry completely. This simple routine is a small but important investment in a healthy and successful harvest. Let's wrap things up with a quick checklist to help you pick the perfect pots for your seedlings. First, size. Start small, about 4 to 7 ounces, and move up as the plants grow. This is especially important for tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants. For squash and cucumbers, though, go big from the start with at least a pint-sized container. Second, material. Your best bet is opaque plastic. It's affordable, durable, and easy to work with. I'd stay away from peat pots unless you're absolutely sure of their quality. Third, drainage. This is a must. Always make sure there are drainage holes at the bottom. If there aren't any, you'll need to make them yourself. No exceptions. Fourth, shape. Look for pots that are wider at the top. This makes it much easier to slide the plant out when it's time to transplant. If you're short on space, square pots are great for fitting more plants on a windowsill. Finally, cleanliness. Always use clean and ideally sanitized containers. Follow these 5 simple rules and you'll avoid 90% of the problems people usually run into when growing seedlings. So we've taken a deep dive into something as simple as a seedling pot. But as you've seen, there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. We've learned that starting small is key, that potting up isn't something to fear. It's actually a good thing, and that a fancy store-bought pot isn't always better than a simple sour cream container. Here's the real takeaway. The best container isn't necessarily the one you paid the most for. It's the one you chose thoughtfully, the one that perfectly fits your plant's needs at its specific stage of growth. Sometimes a humble yogurt cup can actually outperform the most expensive peat pots, simply because it was chosen at the right time and for the right reason. Thanks for watching until the end. If you found this helpful, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more gardening tips and tricks. Now, I have a question for you. What's the most unusual thing you've ever used as a seedling pot? Share your genius ideas in the comments below. Let's put together a collection of the best gardening hacks out there.